Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and today I am joined by Neal. Welcome, Neal.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me, Kate. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here and talk to you about all things Cube.
I am thrilled to talk about Cube as well, and especially with you. We got to connect last year at CubeCon, did a little bit of rotisserie drafting games and a little bit of judge things. So excited to interact here as well.
Yeah, same. And we're recording this a week leading up to CubeCon. I believe we have dinner plans, though things have gotten out of my hands, so I'm trusting Tom, I think, on that one. But yeah.
I have to find a way to fit it in the gigantic spreadsheet of CubeCon events, but we'll make it work. So, Neal, before we dive into specific project of yours that I want to explore together, how did you find your way into Cube and Cube design?
Yeah, I came to Cube pretty early in my Magic career, I would say. So I started playing, as a kid, everyone does. Didn't understand it. I thought you had to sacrifice lands to play spells. So
Oh my goodness.
games came down to if you played a grizzly bear, I just play my giant octopus, and now I win the game. So I didn't understand why it was so popular. Then in college, I had some roommates get me into it. The day Mirrodin Besieged came out, so it was it January, February 2011, and I actually proxied my first cube later that year. Just being broke college student, loving draft, trying to figure out how to get better at it. I ended up copying Adam Staborski's Popper Cube, just kind of one to one, printed out my college library, played a bunch with that, and then the year after, built my first cube. So I don't know how to interact with Magic outside of Cube, basically. And from the beginning, it was all pretty, regular stuff. The MTG Salvation Forum days of White Wolf's unpowered cube, and there was no other way to talk about cube other than unpowered, powered, or popper. Those were all the styles. So it's been very cool to see these very what I thought were set in stone ways of talking about cubes and designing them into all of the things that have really come, I feel like, in prominence in the last like 5 years or so.
And that feels like a surprising fast track from learning how the game works to building a cube. Was your friend group into cubing at the time also?
They had no idea what it was. I think I probably saw a post on like the Magic subreddit or something for how I found it. And really, honestly, it was motivated by just price, right? I just feel like, how could I draft as often as I can without spending $15 to do it? What if we printed out and did it ourselves? Easy.
And so you started with, as you said, one of the traditional or expected versions of Cube, but you've moved into some unique spaces since then.
Yeah. Pretty late, I think, maybe compared to where the cube community as a whole was moving towards. I had that Popper Cube. I curated it for a couple years, kind of fell off of it. But my main cube, which is a Legacy Plus cube, the one I built in 2012, I still maintain and play often, and that's still my main way of playing Magic. So I kind of viewed Magic and viewed Cube through that quote unquote traditional style of play. One of my favorite parts about Cube is not playing with things I don't enjoy. So in my main queue, there's no Monarch. The only free spell is Force of Will and Fire Blast because I'm a boomer. Like, just, very. Again, I want Fair Magic to be you cast a spell, I interact, we kind of go back and forth. And that's what I did for a full decade, right? Until CubeCon and all these things and all these ideas came to the forefront. And yeah, this recent one that we're about to talk about, I saw someone post a list and I was like, that is absolutely wild. Let me get my teeth in that.
So, as to not bury the lead, we are now talking about Neal's Microcube. Do you want to give us the elevator pitch for that project?
Yeah, so in this microcube, or I guess all microcubes, I did not invent the idea. You draft 20 cards, two packs of 10, you build 15 card decks, and that is it. There are no other significant rule changes. Oh, sorry, other than you don't lose if you would draw from an empty library. So you're not trying to deck each other out or anything like that, but yeah, you draw 7 cards, so you start with almost half your library in your hand. You start at 20 life, and sideboarding then becomes super interesting once you know most of your opponent's deck. It really takes kind of the traditional flow of Magic, condensing it into very specific pieces, and yeah, I really enjoyed that.
What makes your build unique as compared to other Microcubes?
Like I said, I like how I like to play Magic, and I did it my way. The first version I saw, which was, I know there were two, I believe, submitted to KubeCon last year, and I was involved in the voting process in that because Tom and I went to KubeCon 2023, and seeing those in that pool was really got my gears turning. They had some gameplay things and design things that weren't necessarily what I was interested in. I know one, for example, had, I believe it's called Oval Dare Chaser or something like that.
Oval Chase Daredevil?
Oval Chase Daredevil, thank you. Where you can set it up as like a combo piece and drain your opponent out, which I think is a very cool thing to do in a format like this, but that's not the kind of magic I really enjoy of setting up these engines and kind of grinding out value that way. I really wanted to take a stab at it where I was doing the kind of more traditional aggro mid range control structures, but really making you figure out how to utilize the most of your pieces. Also, very selfishly, I had all these great cards that I had cut from my main cube over the decade I had been playing it, and God help me, I wanted to cast Icy Manipulator again. I have a foil Deckmaster one, and God, it's beautiful. I have now
Oh
since
man.
cut it from the microcube, so it is in search of another home. So
Well, you
that's,
got me salivating over here. I will never fault you for playing an icy manipulator.
yes, that was another thing where I was so excited to play it, and then once my opponent Icy manipulated my bounce land, I was like, nope, that can't function in this format.
So with a smaller deck size and really a smaller card pool, it seems like a lot of the decisions you make for card inclusion matter a lot. How do you go about evaluating cards for a small environment like that?
Yeah. When I was talking before about having drafted or designed more traditional base cubes, they were often also at the size of 360. My main cube is 384 with 16 card packs, but the idea being we're going to draft all the cards in the pool. And with this microcube, because it was so different as a format than quote unquote the traditional Magic I've been playing before, one of the restrictions I wanted to break for myself was I'm going to design a bigger cube, right? So at 20 cards per player, 160 is your equivalent. My cube is at 330, right? So it is just over 720 compared to what a 360 would be. And what I wanted to do with something that size was put some distance between what I am trying to get players to do and let them be more organic about it. The example I gave in the video I made for the event was I didn't come into this being like I want to build a goblins deck, right? That's not an archetype I'm actively trying to support. But when your spells, you only need 9 spells in a 15 card deck, you can just get 6 goblins, right? That's a thing that can happen. And all of a sudden your siege commander is busted in a way that I wasn't trying to do as a designer. But when the pool gets that large, I wanted players to feel like they really have a lot of creativity and agency over what their deck does because there are so many moving parts. Siege Game Commander is there to do what classic red mid range stuff has always done. But if you pop off with that and the Cranko from War of the Spark that makes all these goblins when it attacks, you got an engine going, right? And what I wanted to do with designing this cube was be hands off and let players be like, hey, I found this thing. And then I, as a designer, went, that rules, and I'm happy. Or, all right, that's a little too far. Let me make some edits there.
And I imagine you really couldn't handhold players to these kind of decks either. Like I guess even if you limited the card pool, players are still going to try to push the envelope.
Absolutely. We have a player here in our group, Jacob, and he and I become good friends, and he loves breaking formats in drafts, and he's good at it. And so it has been really helpful to test with him. I mean, the whole testing group in general has been really good, but he and I have spent a lot of time talking about and playtesting specific cards. And the microcube, one of the benefits of it, because it's so small, you just put that in your deck or in your hand and you find immediately if it is too strong or whatever for the format. And so this cube has gone through a huge number of edits and cuts and changes and all these things over the year and a half I've been working on it, in part because you just don't know how oppressive something is until you see it in play. Because if you're off on the needle by just a thread in a format like this, it just single handedly takes over the game. And that's just something to always keep in mind, but you don't really know until someone tries to break it.
And it sounds like this really benefits from regular testing or getting to play it because of its small size, like just getting to do it over and over again.
Yeah, I host cube drafts at my apartment every other week, and the benefit of this being such a small draft pool is that we would often do 2 drafts a night. So we would draft, play two rounds instead of three, and then just run it back with the parts of the cube that we hadn't drafted. So I would get double the testing in. Folks would be able to give a lot of feedback. It would help me churn through a huge percentage of the cube and really get a sense of what was going on. And my players and drafters were Happy to give feedback. I flagged in my Cube Kobo list cards I was testing, and then I would let them know at the start of the draft and at the end. Don't feel like you have to force these things, but if you're on the fence about a card, please include it. And if not, tell me why. And if it's not getting played enough, obviously that's one sign. And if it's getting played enough and it's totally fine, great, comes off the list and I don't have to worry about it.
How much different does drafting a microcube like this feel from drafting a more traditionally sized cube?
The biggest level up I have had with playing and designing the microcube is recontextualizing what lanes and colors mean, as well as sideboard options. And so what I mean by that is your 15 card deck, your 23-17 equivalent is 9 spells and 6 lands. Maybe your aggro decks play 5 lands, control decks play 7, but 9-6 is your starting point. If you have 3 cards of a color, that can just be your secondary color, right? It's not hard to, in the back half of pack two, just fully have a second color in your deck you didn't intend to when that pack started. And so I've really come to value specking on cards, taking flyers. The power level is there, but I don't necessarily have anything that goes right now. Just take it. And then maybe you'll get all you need is maybe 2 other pieces. And all of a sudden that can be a full engine in your deck brewing because it just only needs a couple things to work. An extension of that, the sideboard becomes so powerful, right? So if you pick
Mm.
up a little bit of graveyard hate, a little bit of like creature removal that maybe you don't need your third copy in the main deck, but then you play against the aggro deck and you would play 3 or even 4, right? Where half your deck is good removal. Just those little things give you a huge amount of equity because you're so likely to see it. And so often when it comes to drafting traditional cubes, I well known in our playgroup for loving lands, taking them, I would argue appropriately. Everyone else says too highly, but they're wrong. Um, part of what I enjoy about that is that it opens up your pools, right? Consistent mana bases are huge for me because then I can do weird stuff when I can reliably cast my removal spells and roadblocks along the way on curve. And here with the microcube, I don't want to say I'm building irresponsible mana bases or decks, but I really am trying to say, let me just go as wide of a net as I possibly can out the gate because it's really not that hard to build together a functional deck. And sometimes you just shoot the moon and your deck is great.
Well, it looks like if your deck is only 15 cards, if you draft fixing lands, that you're very likely to see all the fixing you need.
Yeah, and so one of the things I'm most proud of in designing the cube is actually settling on the non-basic lands that I've put in here. And so they are in the 2 color pairs, the Ravnica Bounce lands, the original Ice Age Pain lands, and then the fast lands, the Scars and Kaladesh fast lands. And then at 3 colors, you have the ECB tapped Tri lands and Wedge lands from Cons and Shards, right? So that is to say, all of those lands come into play tapped and or cost you life, with the exception of the fast lands. And so that is how I've mitigated really doing the thing I want to do the most, which is 5 color piles. uh, you just can't keep having 50% of your mana base come into play tapped against the aggro and mid range decks, right? They're just going to run over you. So specking on lands early gives you those options of sneaking in a source so you don't have to play one basic of your 6 lands that is fully dead except for the one card you want to splash, but you still have to be reserved and mindful of just playing on tempo. And so they're definitely good options to take just in terms of keeping yourself flexible, but you can't get too greedy unless, again, you play against a control deck and all of a sudden you can play that 5 color pile because you're not going to get punished. And again, the sideboarding thing comes super valuable there as well.
I have to say, hearing these numbers so small is making my head spin a little bit. Where it's like, oh right, you're 6 lands. That's like the cap of what you want to do. Or I think in your overview you suggest maybe 7 if you're on the higher end of control.
Yes, very intentionally, the control win cons that can take over a game by themselves are costed at 7. There is nothing at 6 mana or less, a la like a Grave Titan or something that I would say, this is just by itself can take over a game. The control decks have to work for it, right? But then the trade off there is not only are you playing an extra land, of course, you're down 1 spell. So this 7 drop, which you'll cast turn 8 of the game, that's when you'll draw your entire library potentially, needs to make up for essentially 2 cards of value, right? And not just
Mm.
2 cards of value, 2 cards of value your opponents have likely already cast, given that they're lower on the curve. And so they're definitely good things to aim for, but they are dedicated role players of, I'm going to put in the work to make this happen, and then really leverage it that way. One of my favorite examples of this is, I believe it's Blue Sun's Twilight, the sorcery mind control from Phyrexial will be one. But if X is 5 or more, you make a token of that as well. And so for 7 mana, you might control their thing, you get a copy of it, you put a sorcery in the graveyard, and if you're trying to loot your library, that can be how you take over the game, right? But you cast that for less, it's still good, it's still powerful, but you're always going to be being 2 mana lower on the tempo. For 5 mana, you're only taking a 3 drop.
Mm.
And so, an extremely powerful thing that has some versatility early, but it can be a full game plan on its own right. But you have to commit to that.
The clarification there is that you are locked at exactly 15 cards in the library. You can't play more. You can't play. I mean, you certainly
Yes,
can't play fewer, but you can't play more than that.
correct. The very first version we drafted this cube, I did not have a hard 15 limit, and then in the control matchup, it made sense for both players to go up to 30. And I absolutely not. It's just not what I wanted this cube to be. So yeah, a lot of the rules here are written in some playtesting, I would say, of just someone has shown me why it needs to be worded very specifically to do the thing I want it to do.
I think it's another Mark Rosewaterism that he says Magic players will optimize the fun out of anything. But I think in this case, it's finding fun in a different way.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it. Uh, Here's how I want us to have fun, and then Jacob comes in and breaks it. I'm like, well, all right, back to the drawing board.
No, but that's really interesting that then your land cap means a whole lot, and your more expensive spells that cost scales almost exponentially with how difficult they are to cast in a deck that size.
Yeah, and it also just entirely recontextualizes your game plan. I had a draft about a month ago, I think, or so, where it was some kind of control shell, but my last slot was in between something like Arcform Harvester is one of them, where that's the artifact creature from Bloomburrow that loops cards from your graveyard to the bottom of your library. I think it might have been some sort of generic creature like a deranged hermit, and then something else like an oversold cemetery, that black enchantment that buys creatures from your graveyard. Which is to say, I had my 8 spells that all were functional in this black green deck and doing what I wanted to do, but that last slot was really defining my entire endgame, right? Do I want to go infinite turns and try to loot my library? Do I want to grind out creature value, or do I want to put 8 power on the board and just get the game over with as quickly as I possibly can? Obviously, in sideboarding, you can readjust from there, but it's super interesting to make that decision game one of how aggressive do I need to be leading up to it if I'm playing with the range tournament, and how defensive do I need to be and how aggressively can I trade off if I'm playing for Barkfarm Harvester. And so these individual cards now just fully define the tempo your deck plays at, and all that kinds of things that go with that. And that's been something really fun to explore. Just you change 2 cards, and now you are a wildly different player in the matchup in the sideboard.
And you mentioned sideboarding being so important too, because your opponent can see you looping a deranged hermit and make some decisions accordingly for game two.
Absolutely, right. And so it becomes this leveling of, are they going to stick with that? Are they going to put something else in? Can I respond to that? Do I have something that can do both of these things, like a braid, for example, that can kill a creature and an artifact, and maybe they're trying to loop with if it's like a Rato Lantern or something. So cards that are versatile shoot up in value because they can cover multiple of these options at once. But yeah, I mean, you often end game one knowing all 9 of your opponent's spells, or at least 7 of them or something. And if they're an aggro deck, and if you only see 5, you'll guess what the other 4 are kind of doing. And I really have enjoyed that, because then it becomes a little bit more of a puzzle for game 2 and 3, because you're playing with so much known information, except for the little bit of unknown in sideboarding that then becomes the most important thing to leverage.
How often does the draw rule come up, or the like when the game would reach a stalemate state?
If you had asked me this 3 months ago, I would have said never. And then I had one draft one night where, again, that my same friend Jacob, and one of our other friends Frankie, in both drafts of the night against each other, they both asked me, "What do we do if we draw?" I had gone through 60 something drafts maybe, and have never come up, never mattered. And in the one night they both broke it, and I made it out of spite. I'm like, here it is, never ask me this question again. I don't know that even applies to anybody else, but for you two, this is the Jacob and Frankie rule. Let's please move on.
Well, shout out to to those two for
Hmm.
their thoughtful work for the cube.
Yes, nothing if not helpful. I mean, it's also better to answer that question now than someone trying to flag someone down in the middle of QCon being like, what do we do?
As you think about some of what you've done with your microcube, are there design principles that you use here that you carry over into your larger projects?
That's a good question. I think that what I took away from this was Like I said before, letting go of that sense of control as a designer, and given that all of my projects before were so tightly defined as far as the format went, I feel more motivated to see where that leads and really just putting together a collection of cards that I think my players can try to tinker with and go from that rather than right now where if you look at my legacy list, I have an explanation and justification pretty at end for every card in there because you only get to pick so many of the very powerful cards in Magic's history. Whereas with this microcube, it was like, yeah, who knows what it'll do? Throw it in, and we'll see. Some of them are great cards that I loved from history, and some of them are that is a weird thing in this format. Let's see what it is. Again, I have pretty strong rules around what I want the gameplay to be and how powerful things are, so on and so forth. So it's not a matter of letting things be broken per se, but it was definitely an amount of this just seems like it'll be interesting here. I want players in the draft to be like, whoa, this is cool. What can I do with this? And hopefully, my testing, I can assure that it won't be broken, but it'll be something cool for them to do, a new puzzle for them to solve. And the extent to which most of the cards in this format can encourage that kind of thinking, while also there being a lot of, you know, role filler regular cards of, one mana, 2/1s, and so on that are just letting you play a regular game of Magic, then these kind of spicy includes can let players say, oh, okay, let me leverage this here, let me loop here, let me do something like that, and then turn this mid-range deck or this aggro deck into something that can do something way more interesting that normally you just wouldn't get the option to in a more traditional 40 card draft.
Yeah, when each card is that much more impactful, the spice carries through much more strongly.
Yeah, and then you also, right in that same vein, have to be very mindful if something is just a little bit too strong, it just completely warps the format. So, uh, for something that is built on very small edges, I have really tried to do my best to make sure that it is all within the power band that I want, and there shouldn't really be anything that is just, oh well, I opened this and kind of fast tracking here to a 3-0 of just supporting this one card.
So, Neil, what advice would you offer to other designers as they're working on maybe similar projects or maybe something that's very different from a microcube?
I have two pieces of advice. The first is don't be afraid of being mediocre or even bad at either cube design or playing Magic, and don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel or that you need to be entirely innovative. My concern with the proliferation of cube is that it can lead new designers to feel like, well, I'm not good enough at Magic at LSV, right? Let me just copy his cube. Or I've never designed anything. Like, why would I do this? We I think just in general should be celebrating trying things and sucking at them in the beginning, even being mediocre, right? In an 8-person draft pod, half of the table has a losing record, right? Of 1, 2, and 0, 3. But it would be wild to say that half of people, all the people that play Magic are bad. We just accept that there's a bandwidth within there. And it's totally fine when a huge percentage of folks, have an off day or are learning or whatever that may be. And so I really want any new cube designer to not feel like their first project has to be perfect, has to be all these things, has to compete with something like, a cube that has however many followers on Cube Cobra because it's been battle tested. Just try stuff, right? You're going to get reinforcement if it works or if it doesn't, and that's okay. But don't let that intimidation kind of take over whether or not you try something out.
Yeah, right on.
The second part of what I was saying there was of not reinventing the wheel or having to be entirely innovative. Regular Magic is fun, right? I also think that with the proliferation of these interesting cube formats, right, like Microcube or all these things, 100 Ornithopter Cube, Desert Cubes, where they're a twist on kind of traditional limited or traditional Magic, there's a lot of value in still playing a fun legacy list or a popper list or whatever. And so especially if you're a new cube designer, it can be easier to work within the framework of I've played limited, I've played some constructed. Let me try to design a format that plays the kind of Magic I'm familiar with, right? You don't need to be jumping into the deep end right away. Now, if you want to, by all means, right? And in that case, I would maybe encourage you to just proxy someone's list and get a sense of why they have included what they have and what works for that format and go from there. But yeah, don't feel like you have to out the gates come up with this super unique take or super interesting rules change that no one's ever heard of or considered. You'll get there in time, but you definitely don't need to feel like you're chasing that because that's what the community is often centering around and talking about. Because those are interesting, but they're only really interesting when you've had that background of other stuff. And you're like, okay, I know the rules well enough now to break them.
Hmm.
So let me get my footing under me by playing these kind of things that I am more comfortable with, and then go from there.
My dad was a music teacher and I get to teach music, and that's one of those that
Mm.
I hear from time to time is that you imitate all of the masters, and then eventually you'll find your own voice. And I think that applies there. It sounds like a lot of what you're saying.
I think that's a great way to put this for sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of value in right, building your first cube out of cards that you have and jamming stuff together. I really don't think there's any wrong way to play Magic or have fun, right? And especially from my angle, as someone that doesn't really play Magic online in any capacity, the biggest reason why I play Magic is a way to socialize with friends, right? Like that's how I'm playing the game these days. It is hard to imagine a format of Magic being so bad that my friend group doesn't have a good time, right? Like I don't even know if I could design that format. Um, so when your baseline is hanging out with your buddies, how wrong can you really go? So yeah, certainly that's where you want to start of just casting these limited cards if you have from your draft decks that are piling up on your table like mine are. Absolutely no shame in that. But yeah, also just if you want to copy someone else's list from the beginning, get a sense of what cube is, what draft is like, all these what fetching a dual land for the first time might be if you've never done that before. Absolutely also no harm in starting there too.
Well, you mentioned socializing, hanging out with your buddies. I think that's a good segue here. You got to host an event recently that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Would you give us a little bit of insight into Camp Aloo? Am I calling it that right?
Camp Aloo. Aloo is my
Camp Aloo.
little dachshund there who is on that button for that picture that I posted. Yeah, it really started with some friends of ours and my wife and I. We wanted to go camping. It had been a while since we'd done it. Just really wanted to make that happen. I used to be a more avid backpacker, I would say, and then in 2018 I started grad school, right, and then obviously COVID happened as I graduated grad school, and then professionally I'm also a forensics clinical social worker, which is just to say that starting my career in the middle of COVID there really took a lot of time. And so camping and being out in nature was really one of those things that I had done so much for so many years. And you blink and it's been 4 years, right? And it just,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we
Mm-hmm.
got to get back out there. So yeah, we'd organized this camping trip, picked a day where it was available and we were all free, very unintentionally. And I want to stress this despite my wife or Tom or other friends maybe telling differently. Uh, I did not intend for it to be on my birthday weekend. That was despite my best efforts. I actually tried to see if I could get them to pick another weekend, but after we had gone over like 3 months of weekends, I couldn't in good faith be like, okay, but another one just because I don't want you all to sing happy birthday or whatever.
I'm sorry, y'all. I just packed this party hat on accident. This was totally not
Oh,
planned.
very much the inverse of I did not do it and my wife did pack one and then made me put it on. But so that's where the 32nd annual Camp Aloo comes from. Of I was like, okay, the most I will give you is we can put me turning 32 on the button, but no other references, please. So yeah, so we organized this camping trip right at this point, obviously, where we are in our lives. A lot of our friends also play Magic. We have an East Bay Cube Discord out here, which has been a really big part of how I have re-engaged with the scene post-COVID and the death of game stores locally here, and a lot of my friend group fracturing from moving out or moving out of the area, things like that. So this Discord has been a really good place to reconnect with folks that particularly love cubing, right? And so now they're just a lot of our good friends. What was originally going to be somewhere between 4 and 8 people ended up being, well, the final count is 22 people at some point came through the weekend.
Goodness
Uh, I
gracious.
think there were like 18 of those were camping, and then maybe 4 had dropped by just for a day. I forget the exact details, but somewhere, yeah. So point being, it ballooned pretty large. But what a lucky problem to have, right? That we have enough folks that want to spend time together and hang out. And so once this was getting in motion, I wanted to harken back to some sort of magic event that would tap into the nostalgia of playing magic at a summer camp type thing with friends. Really, it was an idea I'd been kicking around for a while of something to do with like a whiteboard or themed whatever, just because I have a lot of nostalgia for that era of magic. Or I say era, but we're talking about right 95 to 2009. But
It's a kind of an
yeah,
era. Yeah.
yeah. Certainly. And I guess now we're coming back to it too. So
Things
whole other
come full.
thing.
Hold on to your bell bottom jeans.
Yeah, good to know. I will pull those out of the closet there. Um, yeah, so I kind of had this idea a little bit floating in the back of my head. And then once this camping trip was becoming what it was, I was like, great, this is now is my opportunity to really see if I can put this into practice. My design tenets for what I was trying to do was twofold. One, I wanted it to be some kind of event where nobody felt forced or obligated to play Magic, and it would be asynchronous, right? I missed, for example, right, a couple hours of this thing because we went hiking around the campground we were at, And I didn't want that to be of people having to choose of do I hike, do I not, the whole tournament has to stop because they're doing whatever. It was very, very important to me to be asynchronous. And then the other guiding light I had was I wanted to make all of my nerd friends talk to each other. uh, God help me, I'm gonna make you all socialize, right? I mean, again, most of us are from this Cube Discord, so a lot of us already know each other. But I had friends from different areas in life, and friends that I had from college that weren't in the area but were coming by, and I know them through Magic, but they don't necessarily know others. So I really wanted to design something where they all had to interact. And with those two design goals or tenets or however to describe them, from that came what I called this just whiteboarder summer camp project, where everybody got a sealed pool of whiteboarder cards. They got some options to choose some additional cards. There was rules around how much you could trade with other people. And then the goal was just to run a tournament structure that was similar to Duelist Kingdom from Yu-Gi-Oh, which is a very specific reference. But the idea being that everybody starts with 10 chips, you kind of wager them with your opponent before the start of the game, how many you want to go for. And at the end of the event, just whoever has the most chips wins. That way, it felt like players could choose if they wanted to bet more or less. There was one player who went all 10 in on their first match and lost, and they're like, okay. So just, I wanted folks to be able to do whatever they wanted to do, right? This was a camping trip, first and foremost, where Magic would be played, but I really didn't want it to be where, if someone was coming and their partner didn't play Magic, why would they come? No, no, no. Please come hang out. Let's talk by the campfire, and we're gonna do some cooking, go on a hike. Your ability to play this game, or even interest in wanting to, shouldn't dictate whether or not we get to spend time together. Now, for the friends that wanted to play more Magic, obviously they can do that, right? If that's what they want to do with their time, sure. But I didn't want to make it a requirement, and I really didn't want to alienate any friends or other people that felt like, well, I don't want to come to this thing if I don't know this game.
How did players respond to that asynchronous tournament idea?
Super well. The thing that I feel like led to the most success for how this went was that everyone really embraced it. I did a lot to try to let players have agency in how they interacted with it, but that only works if, folks sort of meet me where they're at. But every little thing that I sort of let up to the player's discretion, someone in the group was like, this is my thing now. So, for example, the chips that I gave folks were little resin animals, and I very intentionally got a variety of animals, thinking, oh, somebody may want to like trade for all the ducks or whatever. Oh my God, people just, for some of them, it became like their mascot, and they were like, this is the one, this snail is I'm gonna protect this one at all costs, and I'm never giving it up. Or someone was trading for all the capybaras they could find. Just unintentional on my end. I was like, this might be a little cute, but for some folks, it was just that is what they came here to do all of a sudden. And then you had other players that were like, just give me 10 at random. I don't really care. So just building that into like, this is what you make of it, right? And the asynchronous part of that really added on that, where for the folks that really wanted to collect all the things and do the stuff and play a bunch, it let them felt like they could keep doing that, right? They would play a game and then go ask someone else around, hey, you want to jam? And they felt like that was something they were empowered to do. And the folks that wanted to put it down and do something else, also no harm for them. And so, there was a huge range of how many games were played by people, but that to me is a benefit, not a bug.
Yeah, because then the game is not just Magic. The game can be collecting capybaras, or the game can be, just hiking in between things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we talk about collecting things, right? So I will also say the rule set I designed is very much for this. A buddy of mine, Tyler of Jun Q fame, Tyler, was at this event, and he is going to some Magic events sometime in a bit. I don't remember the details, but they're getting an Airbnb, and a bunch of them are going to be in the house. And so he was picking my brain around how he could run something similar for that weekend. They're all together. We talked a lot about it, and I explained why I had the rules or the things that I had for this based on the audience. But if this was going to be a house full of Magic players, I would change a lot of things, right? You don't need to prioritize asynchronicity in the way that I did for this. You don't need to really account for, well, half of these group are people that are recamping 2 nights, and some people are just going to come by for 3 hours on a Saturday. How could they still play and not feel like one of them is wasting their time, right? So all these other factors I had to keep in mind, where he doesn't have to do that for that kind of thing. And so, in that sort of structure, players got to trade for things that they found most interesting. Tom, who won the event, I think ended up with 8 volcanic hammers or something.
Just how you draw it up.
I mean, he started with 2, and boy, did that guy sort of remind me a little bit of like card sharking at a thing of just like, hey, you need a hammer, right? You want this good white card or whatever. I mean, obviously, it's all good fun. He didn't, certainly it wasn't bad or anything, but it was very funny to see him sort of slide by people and be like, "Hey, let's talk about this other hammer you have and probably don't need." There was another woman, Zoe, who was there, and she hadn't played Magic in about 20 years, and she was open to this because she recognized so many of these cards, and I didn't know this until that event. Turns out she's a Stone Rain fanatic. I would be lying if I didn't say it hasn't affected my opinion of who she is as a person now, but she wanted to just make sure her opponents couldn't play things, and she ended up with like five of them. Caden found that card. I think it's called Tackle Maggot, that weird enchantment
Yes.
that like, yes, it was in there. It was like maybe someone will have fun with this, and I would just be across the campsite hearing groups of people start chanting Tackle Maggot every time he tried to cast it. So all of these things that were intentionally open ended, and folks really got to embrace whatever part of Magic they liked. Right? My wife, she doesn't really play a lot of Magic. She actually only kind of recently got back into it this year. There was about 4 or 5 years there where she didn't play any limited, but Bloomborough, as it does, kind of got her back in, and she was so excited about like the old creepy art, and that card Witch Hunter was really really her vibe, and so she lost it. We also played for Auntie, which we can get to in a little bit maybe, and I had everybody sign the card as the Auntie, the idea being this will be like a living collection of cards, and every time we go camping we bust it out again and see the record of this thing grow and change and warp and get tear from picnic tables and all that kind of thing. Anyway, my wife had her Witch Hunter go out for Auntie. She lost. I had the rule that players could only trade with, for any person, they could trade as many people they wanted, but for each person, it was 2 cards per day. Again, really trying to make you have to socialize of you got to collect cards from everybody at the campsite instead of just one person, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
because it was per day. Literally at 12:01, she went up to her friend who got the cards, like, "I want it back. What do you just take anything from my? I want my Witch Hunter back." And just that freedom there for her to be like, what I really like about this is that art, that vibe, that thing, and I'm gonna make that happen for me. Great. I'm glad that she was able to interact with Magic in that way and tell that story now.
And you mentioned you may want to chat a little bit about Anti. How did Anti impact the experience for your players?
I love playing for Anti in environments like this, right? Obviously, Anti is not good for Magic as a whole, but I just think it is extremely fun when they're not your personal cards. I actually forgot to mention this earlier. Part of the idea for this was motivated by a cube I played at CubeCon last year. In the free to play area, there was a player, and I, for the life of me, cannot remember who they were. So if you are hearing this, please tell me who you are, because as far as I know, they don't have a list on CubeCover or anything. But they built a old bordered cube where you played for Ante. The very first match I played, my opponent anteed their Soul Ring, and then they won at 1 or 2 life. And I just losing that game was unbelievably fun. The idea that for a second there I could have had a busted deck, and now not only does their deck stay busted, I am down a good card in my deck, and I'm digging in my sideboard for, did I draft another white creature? Am I really gonna have to put in 2 forests now for this whatever green creature because I just need to get playables? Like, I've really enjoyed that whole experience, and so I wanted to bring that to this project because, again, the idea being if you are losing cards as you go, you now have to trade again, right? You have to go find other cards of your color, or you have to find different basics from somebody else to support the way your deck is shifting. And just that is a forced way to have people talk to each other, interact, right? Look at pools, all that kind of stuff. There was a little concern that if there wasn't anti, which was never an option because I had to make it happen, but if there wasn't, right, people would get too settled and kind of build their custom pool. And then once it was power max, they would only need to check in with the new players that would come to the event later them and see if there's anything they could trade for there. But Anti kept things constantly in motion, constantly flowing, affect what you would trade for, affect how your deck functioned, maybe even your colors. And again, just if my goal is to get people interacting with each other, it was perfect for that. And it also gave people an excuse to sign the cards, and we ended up with, I don't know, 100 something signed cards as a memento from this kind of thing. And I'm excited to see that grow in the future.
I was about to use the word memento, where you have these nice markers of experiences that have happened, good and bad, I suppose, along the way.
Yes, my hope is no one felt too bad with it, or if they did, it was within the context of this. I had a game where I was playing against my wife actually, and she had a bunch of flyers. I boarded in Silklash Spider, which is an M9 rare or something. Well, I think it's from maybe Onslaught or Invasion originally, but it's like a green flyer that for X green green you can deal X damage to all flyers. Boarded in, feeling so great about myself, and immediately it's anti for game two. And so, there's a level of I feel bad for this, but it's just that is very fun to me, right? That I really enjoyed that. Even when you lose, it becomes a story, it becomes a thing. It also helps that the stakes for this were functionally non-existent, kind of going off the Yu-Gi-Oh vibe. I really enjoyed prizing that had no value but had bragging rights. So I ended up collecting, call it 20 or just shy of that, iconic Yu-Gi-Oh cards from the first season where this like Duelist Kingdom event was supposed to take place. And so anybody who played in the event would get to take a card home as a trophy, and the winner got the Millennium Puzzle, which is what Yugi wears in the thing. All of this is very niche, right? It cost me like sub $30 to get all that together, but it's super fun, right? People get to like be invested in. I had the trophy hanging from the front of our tent all weekend, so it was like in the center of the campground, walking around. I think, right, Auntie gets a little feel bad when it's like, well, man, I invested so much time and energy and all this stuff. Even not even like the monetary value of the cards, right? But just within the context of like, I want to win this thing. But here it's all fun, even down to the pricing. We don't need to take it too seriously, and that is very much intentional. Of you win some, you lose some, but you get to try again.
Well, Neal, you've spoken about this event in such glowing terms already. What are some of the biggest takeaways from running this event?
I think folks, for whether it be Cube, whether it be an event like this, whatever, should start everything they do with two lists of what are my design goals and what are things I think the players would want. Being very stringent up top of, right, I want to make folks talk to each other, I want it to be asynchronous, right? Having those as my guiding lights for this, let me then get very specific with this white bordered sealed tournament with trading and all this kind of nonsense. But all of that was added on the foundation of these are the most important things to me. And then layered on, right, of what do I think my players would have fun with, right? It's not fun if things that I think are maybe holding up the competitive integrity for the event or whatever are just not enjoyable for players, right? And so Anti was a great example of there of somebody didn't like Anti, right? This is maybe not the event for them. Though my hope is that's mitigated by getting to do it again and trading with other people, and you maybe lose your big white 5 drop that was going to take over the game, but you could find somebody else to trade for it. So there's ways to kind of leverage that emotion again of, okay, my deck is good again now. I want it to be there, but I think right that it's important to keep in mind of is this going to be a negative experience for folks? Once you start there, off to the races, right? We really can get creative, get interesting, get wild, break all the other rules that are normally there, because the ones that are the most important to you are literally written in stone and always your guiding light of something you come back to of does this violate those rules. My buddy Jacob here, he has an uncube. And earlier this year, he was like, I need to do a cube audit. And he brought over his cube. And I was like, before we take it out of the box, you and I are going to sit down for 20 to 30 minutes. And you need to tell me your thesis for this cube, right? What is your goal? What do you want? What do you want players to get out of it? All of the specificity around what is blue white doing in this environment is so secondary to, are you trying to create stories? You want people running around the room? Does dexterity matter? All of that kind of thing. So the more specific folks are at the top, not only does it make it easier for everything, but then you're just so much more proud of your project because it's doing the thing you had laid out for what you want to do.
I love that. Do you think you're going to run another Camp Aloo?
Oh, absolutely. The name may change. We'll kind of see see how that goes, but I hope not. This trip really was instigated and organized by me, right? Like I said, we got 22 folks from all different parts of life, so it wasn't even like when I was updating things on carpools, which I also helped organize, I could post in a single Discord, right? It really was the biggest group of people were in the Discord, and that was 6 people. So it really was texting people and emails and this and that. So I really enjoyed it, right? Don't get me wrong, but it was a lot to take on. But it was a really, really good first draft at this, and folks, like I said, everyone seemed to have fun and enjoyed it. So I think this was a good template for what we do in the future. To the extent that I can maintain the name Camp Aloo as I continue to give off responsibility, we'll see how that exists and changes. But yeah, I don't know if it's annual. I don't know if it's gonna be semi-annual. Who knows exactly what it'll take. But my goal for next year, just as a person, is to be outside in nature more. This is a great way to tack that on and to invite more friends and all that kind of thing. It definitely will come back in some form or fashion. But as we enter winter here, I think this will be revisited till early spring and get a sense of, okay, who wants to do it again and how many weddings you all have to go to so we can find a free weekend.
Well, Neal, we have covered a lot of ground, a lot of good ground. One of my favorite questions to ask as we near wrapping up here is if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick and who would you have do the illustration?
So I thought about answering this in a lot of different ways, right? I think the sort of starting point is what are some of your favorite cards? But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized a lot of my favorite cards are my favorite cards in part because of the art, right? I really enjoy that whole process. Porcelain Legionnaire is like an instant one for me of just kind of the smoothness of the Mirrodin behind him, and then the sharpness of the blade, and really what that embodies about the artifact creatures that Phyrexia's taking over. Love that card, absolutely beautiful. I don't feel the need to change that art, right? So I started with what are cards I have cast a lot in my history of Magic that I wish the art was something else. And so, right, no shade to the artist or whatever, but
This is why we've chosen Tackle Maggot. No, I'm just kidding.
oh, I terrified. What a terrifying card. Um, so the card I settled on was Lingering Souls. There are two different arts for Lingering Souls, right? The original Dark Ascension one, and then it got reprinted in, I was like a dual deck or whatever. I know the
Hmm,
Time
hmm.
Spiral Remastered uses that new art. Both of those arts are just not for me for various reasons. Do not care for them. Love Lingering Souls as a card, right? Think it's powerful without being too powerful. Having to splash it, it's just a super well designed card that I really enjoy, and always a card that I'm like, oh, I wish I was looking at something else here. Um, so with that, I think the artist I've settled on is Drew Tucker, but more specifically, the early era of Drew Tucker. Right, he's come back more recently with like Modern Horizons. Is that two or three? The one with Brainstone. Um,
That would have been number two, I
Two.
believe.
Okay. So he did a lot of early stuff in Magic. Didn't for a while. I'm not sure why, and then came back for that. But Brainstone is very different than his earlier arts, which are a lot more like watercolor-ish and undefined. Vertigo in particular is a piece I really like. There's this kind of like effervescence to it that to me also really works with the concept of spirits, right? I think the idea of untethered something in the void with that undefined use of color that he has, I think that that would look gorgeous. So there are certainly magic artists that are great, right? Rebecca Gray, Wiley Beckett, Sam Gray, Magali. I've heard someone talk about. Tom Warnerstrand is one that I also thought a lot about,
Hmm, hmm.
where I like those. I think they're Ice Age mountains. Again, I know them from the whiteboard or dual decks with all the projects, but I think the original I love all of those mountains, like a little cartoony, fantastic. So if I had a second option, it would be him doing anything. But I really love to see Drew Tucker's take on something with spirits.
Outstanding. Well, Neil, this has been a delight for me, and what a treat to go through your projects, not just your cubes, but the things you're doing to bring other people into connecting with each other.
Yeah, that to me is far and away the most important thing, and I think that that really, I hope rather that that came through in our conversation here, where I think Magic, the most important things it needs to be is fun and social, for me at least, right? Other folks have different priorities, that's totally fine, but I am so uninterested at this point in my life of being good at Magic. I mean, I wasn't good at it ever, but there were times where I was trying to be better at it. And it's just that's just not it's not my goal, right? I want to hang out with folks. I want to have reasons for them to come over to my house and for us to do things together. I want a shared language and a hobby we share. And I want folks who are new to the game but are is just a good person to integrate themselves in here in a way that doesn't cost any money, right? If you want to show up with the 4 pack of beer, great. If not, no worries. We're here. We got something that's we had a new player join our group about a year ago. Literally, this man owns exactly one draft pool of Bloombore's worth of cards. That is the only Magic he has bought in a year and a half of drafting because he just plays Cube, and that's great,
Amazing
right? Yeah, that's awesome. That's the kind of thing I want this to be open for.
goals, honestly.
I mean, huge respect. We have another player here, not in our Q group immediately, but out here who, my understanding is that he and his wife had an agreement of no magic cards enter the house. So every draft he drafts well, usually some very good aggro deck or whatever, punches face, puts it out on the table and says, "This is yours, right? Whatever value you want to scrap over a fight or do whatever, I just don't care." And I think about that man a lot.
Well, thinking about connecting, if folks want to get in touch with you or follow up on any of the cubes you're working on or anything like that, where would be the best place for us to point them?
I tend to keep a pretty low profile on the internet, so not a lot of good ways to do it. My Cube Cobra profile is Bacon Neal. A lot of regret there of being 13. and finding a username that stuck with you for the rest of your life and getting caught up in the bacon memes of lore.
No, no, it's great.
Oh, I hope it comes around again to being great because I have not hit that stride yet. But yeah, so Baconeal. So single N. My name is Neal with EA. That's where I am in most places, honestly. In Discord, I mostly am involved in like our local Discord, the East Bay Cube Discord. So for anybody that's in the area out here and wants to join Cube, right, that would be a place to start. So yeah, that's probably just the easiest way. Just send me a message on Discord. Honestly,
So if folks want to find you, they should travel out into the woods and find the tables where people are playing whiteboarded magic for stakes.
oh God, hope I'm there. And if not, like, how do I join that group?
Neal, thank you so much for your time, for your passion, for sharing so much about these. I'm looking forward to connecting here in just a few short days at time of recording. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I had listened to a bunch of the episodes before, and then in preparation for this, I was like, all right, let me listen to the handful that I haven't. And in binging them all so back to back, I don't know if you've heard the NPR ad where they do a supercut of people saying to Terry Gross, "What a good question," or "That's a great question." But you absolutely qualify here. I know I did it myself at
No.
least once in this interview, but everyone was just like, "That's a great question. What do you?" So as someone that doesn't understand editing or anything on the internet, I encourage someone there to make that super cut. So just for you and for everybody else to be like, yeah, this is a great podcast. You're a great interviewer. Really appreciate everyone's interest in all the stuff that they do with Cube and how you meet them where they're at. So yeah, no, I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.